time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Maybe you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, and click subscribe. Better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 years and then shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement happiness. Society tells us that retirement is the time when we can truly live and be happy. But does retirement make good on that promise? Furthermore, what makes us happy in the first place? Today, we cover what every retirement income plan needs. Having regular and consistent income is yet another way to help resolve what we call the money disorder. In this podcast, we give you 3 things every retirement income plan needs, which includes an entire paradigm shift on how a retiree views their nest egg. Enjoy this episode. Well, welcome back to the show, everybody. We are so glad you are here. We've got another great show here today as we continue this series on retirement happiness. And we're not going to give up this little thread here that we've been talking about, the financial side, something we don't talk a lot about on this show, but we're going to talk about what every single income plan needs for your retirement. So again, we're so glad you're tuning in here today. This is going to be a great show. Before we get started, I do want to talk about our next online webinar that we have coming up on April the 12th at 11 a.m. Central. It is called Grand Connections, Creating Deep, Meaningful Connections with Grandchildren. In a world that is filled with turmoil, in a world that is changing, something that we have seen in our experience with working with retirees and more specifically grandparents is that their heart cry, their deepest desires are to impact the lives of their grandchildren. And they really struggle to do that or maybe don't know where to start. Well, we believe that that pathway for a meaningful relationship with grandchildren is through this idea of connection. But again, where do you start or how do you nurture those connections with grandchildren? Well, coming up on Wednesday, April 12th at 11 a.m. Central, we're going to have a gentleman by the name of Jim Jackson. He is the co-founder of an organization called Connected Families. This is based out of the Twin Cities of Minnesota. They do extensive work helping parents nurture their relationships with their children and grandparents nurturing relationships with their grandchildren. He's going to join us along with a gal by the name of Deja Young. She's a Connected Families certified parent coach, and they're going to describe the Connected Families framework. There's 4 specific layers. They're going to talk about those 4 specific layers. They're going to teach you what they mean, and they're going to give you tips on how you can use these 4 layers to, again, create and cultivate deep, meaningful connections with your grandchildren. This is a seminar that we haven't covered before, kind of going down a road we haven't done before, but we think that this is going to be huge impact, huge value add. Again, it's called Grand Connections, Creating Deep, Meaningful Connections with Grandchildren. It's a free seminar, but you have to register. And the way that you register is by going to our website, retirerepurpose.com, and click on Grand Connections Webinar. Again, go to retirerepurpose.com and click on Grand Connections Webinar. It's coming up again on April the 12th. Ben Tejas joins me on the show. Really excited about this one because as I just mentioned, as you have worked with retirees and grandparents for now 2 decades, this is, when you ask them what means the most to you, I mean, kids and grandkids come up almost every single time.
Yeah, Jared, I get the opportunity to meet with so many people on a weekly basis, and when they're in that age group where they do have grandchildren, that's what we start talking about. That's what really makes them excited to talk is, hey, my grandchildren did this, they did that. And there's a big difference between just watching your grandkids and then really connecting with them. And I think hopefully, people tune into this one. This is going to be a great event because more so than anything right now, grandparents need connection with those around them, but they need connection with their families and more importantly, their grandchildren.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when it came up a time to do our next seminar coming up for the spring, or one of them, it was like, what is the heart cry? And again, the heart cry was that I want to help, I want to leave a legacy, I want to impact, I want to love more deeply. And so it's kind of a no-brainer we went down this path.
Yeah, and that's what legacy is. It's a lasting impact on people that will live hopefully longer than you will as a grandparent, and these are your grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be able to carry on your story, and no more important time than right now for them to hear your story in a changing world and all the things going on in our world today. It is so important that your grandchildren connect with you on a deeper level. And I've been to some funerals. A good friend of mine's dad passed away not long ago, and all the grandchildren got up and they shared stories, and they shared how they connected with my friend's dad, and it was so meaningful. But if you've been to a funeral of somebody that's lived a good life and has maybe they're in their 80s or whatever and they pass away, go to the funeral and you will learn so much about really their relationship with their grandchildren. And I think that's so much, like you said, it's so important to retirees. That's what they're after. So tune into that webinar. It's going to be great.
Yeah, again, coming up on April the 12th, go to retirerepurpose.com, click on Grand Connections webinar to register. If you can't make it live, it's not a big deal. Just register anyway, because you're going to get an email with the replay. So again, I encourage everybody to head over to the website and go sign up. All right, today, Ben, we are continuing this series on retirement happiness, and we're now, I think, 7 episodes deep. But I got to say, we've spent the last, I think, 3 episodes being a little bit more going down the rabbit trail. I don't want to call it a rabbit trail, but more on this idea of how money plays into retirement happiness. And 2 episodes ago, we talked about the money disorder, and that was something that maybe a lot of folks haven't heard. I have to say that was the most popular episode that we have done. It wasn't the most downloaded, but it was the most downloaded the fastest, if that makes any sense to you, Ben, or people listening. But anyway, bottom line, a lot of people listened to it and downloaded it, and then we talked about how to resolve it. We talked about how to resolve it at the end of that show. We spent an entire show last week talking about wealth transfer plans, which we would say is yet another way to help resolve the money disorder. Ben, let's just give a quick overview. Let's start at the beginning. What is a money disorder, and why is it such a dangerous thing?
Well, even before that, Jared, right in our tagline before this show, we talk about this is not a show about money. Right? It's and generally it isn't. But what we felt is that so much. You look back at the Bible. The Bible talks about money over 2,300 times. Right? So we know that this is important stuff for people to hear. Number one, but for when I talk with retirees, so much of what I see them struggle with many times is this money disorder. Yeah. So I think it's important that we continue to talk about this. So the money disorder, really, you look at the word disorder, and it says something that is abnormal, something that, in fact, it's a state of confusion. It's, in fact, if you're looking at it from an outsider in, which I am as, in a retirement planner role, I say, well, you shouldn't have this disorder. It's like if a counselor looked at you and said, there's a disorder, right? You shouldn't think this way. Right. It doesn't work that way. Right. If you ever, a counselor will never say that to you. They'll never say, well, just stop thinking that way. Mm-hmm. The reality of it is you're thinking that way for some reason, right? So what we need to do is accept, hey, I am feeling this way. Mm-hmm. Why? And then give you an antidote to it. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. The money disorder basically is you've got too much of your mind wrapped up into your money. And this is for people who have enough, or perhaps even have way more than enough. And they shouldn't be worried about that. And we believe that this disorder can really just kind of steal away from the life and the fulfillment that a retiree could and should have during this time. We talked about ways to get rid of it. Again, at the end of the Money Disorder show, we talked about contentment. We talked about generosity and giving, how these are all antidotes. It almost, generosity or giving kind of forces you to let go, because again, the money disorder is kind of a hoarding thing. It's based in fear, where we're scared we're going to run out. So we almost have to manipulate our behavior to open up our hands, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, physically do that. Hold on, grip, make a tight fist. There's tension, there's pressure there, and then just open that up. And I think that's the feeling I want you to have. And if you want contentment, it starts with gratitude, right? Accepting like what I do have, not what I don't. And then it kind of ends with giving. And I think that's kind of the 1-2 punch to really take care of some of that feeling, to make sure that you are content in what you have. And again, we talked about in that show, go back and listen to it, but it's not easy. The Apostle Paul says it's a learned thing. I've learned the secret to contentment, and that's really what we're trying to help people see.
Last week, we dedicated an entire show to wealth transfer plans, because we believe a lot of people hang on to the money so tightly for so long because they want to leave an inheritance. And I think we made a very stark contrast between inheritance and legacy, and how a wealth transfer plan can actually be more beneficial to heirs, loved ones, and charities than just leaving the pile of money to someone when you die.
Yeah, you really can't create a legacy after you're gone, right? Legacy is the lasting impact on people. Inheritance is the money that your kids spend. So if you pass away and give them an inheritance, that's not a legacy. Okay. What you need to do is begin, even from a financial standpoint, preparing the next steward by giving them pieces while you're living and helping them live with that newfound wealth. So I think it's very, very important that as part of a way to get you past the money disorder, that you really recognize, God owns it all. Under that is, okay, I'm entrusted with so much. How much do I really need to live on? And then the rest of it, I begin that wealth transfer plan to either, my favorite charities, because they need it now, right, or your children, because they can use it too.
Well, again, going back to this idea of retirement happiness, I don't know what can make a retiree more happy than seeing the fruits of their labor, so to speak, in action while you're still alive, and then helping coach them so that they steward it the way that you feel it should be stewarded. When it comes down to just this idea of happiness, to me, that's a great thing. Plus, we mentioned on last week's show, the average age of somebody receiving an inheritance is 61 years old. It's just not an optimal time for people to get that kind of sums of money.
Yeah, most people, when they are in their 60s, if they have planned like they should have, they probably don't necessarily need it, or even appreciate it to the point that they would have in their 30s.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then it's lots of times what we see is people that get that type of inheritance at that age, they don't even really know what to do. They don't know what to do with it, and perhaps they're struggling with the money disorder themselves, so they can't even spend it. So again, you can see kind of how the wheels come off this wagon pretty quickly.
Yeah, and there's something different about money that you've earned yourself. We're talking about that today, money you've earned yourself and money that you've been given, right? And money so far more valuable to people. I deal with a lot of really successful people, Jared, and when I see them spending inherited dollars versus money that they've earned, it just is different. It's different how you look at success and how you look at what you've been able to work hard for versus what you've been given.
Again, if you missed the last two shows especially, go back and listen to those shows. Listen to the one on the money disorder, and then listen to last week's show on the wealth transfer plan, because these all go hand in hand. So today we're going to cover what every income plan needs. Again, we're not going to give up on this idea of the financials quite yet before we move on. So again, wealth versus income. This is kind of an idea that you keep coming back to, Ben. It's mentioned in your book, but what is the main reason why this is such a thing that people need to kind of understand?
Well, before you get into resolving the money disorder, you have to have a mental shift, right? It's so important for people to look specifically at this shift in their mind to go from saving to spending, and it's not an easy thing. I see clients all the time who come in, and in fact, we ask them, okay, how has your cash flow been? And it typically is, my cash flow is good. And we ask them, how much cash are they actually sitting on? And if that number continues to grow in retirement, they're actually saving. And then I'll ask, well, what are you saving for? Right? And the reality is they've been conditioned to save their entire lives. And again, there are people out there that are listening to the show that should be saving, granted.
Right.
Again, we're not talking to you. We're talking to people that have not too much, but really, I will say they probably have too much. Many of us do. I mean, we're the wealthiest people in the world just living in America. And then you look at the wealthiest of the wealthy, and it's like, well, yeah, I don't need to continue to save. I need to make that shift to spending / giving.
Yeah, I think it kind of even goes back to the number one question that I think overall financial planners get. I just got it from a friend of mine just this last week. We were talking about this business, and they said, how much do you need in the bank to retire? And again, we've said this many times on the show. That's the wrong question to ask. It's not about how much you have saved. It's how much you're going to spend, which I think illustrates this idea. People are not in the spending mentality. They're locked into the saving mode for so long.
They're locked into wealth versus income.
Right.
Again, we'll talk about that. Wealth is not the useful side of money. When people say, how much do I need? What's my nest egg have to be? Well, that's your wealth. You should be looking at it completely different. Say, what sources of income will I have? Right. Income is the useful side of money, where we get to spend, where we get to enjoy trips, where we get to give. That is really the more valuable thing. Many times wealth destroys happiness.
Right.
And again, that mental shift has to change from building up this pile of money. Remember last show we talked about this wood pile example.
Right.
I still go back to that one, Jared, for you, because it just came up in the show, wasn't in show notes or nothing. You said, well, it's kind of like my wood pile.
Right.
Like it is exactly like your wood pile that you've saved up and you've been not hoarding, but in some cases feels that way.
Yeah.
Now, what if, Jared, instead of having you having to go out and get that wood from a certain pile, it just appeared right next to your fireplace every day?
I wish it did. I'd have no problem burning it.
Yeah, it'd be a lot easier to burn.
Yeah.
Same thing with income, right? It just appears, right? And that's really why we look at income.
Let's spend just a brief moment, talk about the shark fin idea, because the shark fin is really how we should view wealth versus time. And there's a definite peak, again, like the top of a shark fin, but then there's a point where it needs to tail off. Explain that kind of in the next 30 seconds to 60 seconds.
Yeah, so picture a shark fin going up, the dorsal fin, right, goes up one side and then down the other, right? And what you're looking at there is that if you are truly looking at your wealth in the right way, and you're saving for the first part of your life, so maybe that's from your 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever that is, and that shark fin continues to go up and grow. Hopefully you're saving and you're accumulating. At some point that should top off. The money that you've saved that you hope to spend should then go down. The principal even should go down to some point, and hopefully if you do it right, it ends right your last breath. Now, we wouldn't cut it that close, but the idea is you built the wealth, you saved it so that you can spend it. Now, if you're the type of person that says, well, hey, I'm saving this money so that I can leave a bunch of cash to my kids someday, well, yeah, then you should have a different looking shark fin, right? Or a different looking income plan. But in our case, most people today that I meet with, they say, I saved it, I'm going to spend it. And that, is just, in my mind, an easier way to overcome the money disorder and say, yeah, I'm making this mental shift from saving to spending.
Well, again, if somebody says, I'm going to save some for my kids or charity, then that's where, again, we're going to default right to a wealth income plan. So again, there's always a counter move to how people can view this idea of money.
Yeah, if they say, hey, my goal was to get some funds to a charity or my children, then I'm going to go back to last week's show and say, yes, important. Let's delineate between what I'm air quoting their money and your money.
Right.
And I'm able to say, okay, this is you still have your income plan working over here.
Absolutely.
Where's that coming from?
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is in, again, their money, if you will, where you're saying, okay, when's the best time for that child or charity to receive it? Both from a tax plan but also for their life and legacy.
Absolutely,
what you're doing needs to become prior to death.
Yeah, that's a great point. So shift number one here that needs to happen for every income plan to work for you to be happy is that you've got to change this idea of saving and change it to spending. What's point number two?
Well, this is, I get a funny look every time I bring this up, but retirees need a budget. Jared, I think more than anything, retirees need a budget. And usually I get the look is like, well, people in the industry, the financial industry, have been telling me I need a budget my whole life because why? Well, you got to give your dollars a plan. Otherwise, they just disappear. This is kind of the same thing. I think every dollar that you take in needs to have a plan. I feel that way whether or not you're earning or spending. But the reason that you need a budget while you're retired is to help you spend, not to help you save.
Sure.
It's a completely different thing, but just as important.
Yeah, again, I think the idea of giving yourself an excuse to spend helps get rid of this, money disorder, because the money disorder wants you to hold and hoard. You also mentioned that, again, a lot of retirees say, well, I budgeted my whole life so I can save for retirement, and now I'm retired, so I don't need that anymore, and that's just null and void.
Yeah, again, budget's not a bad thing.
Right.
It's kind of a funny word, but when you hear that word, it should be, okay, this is helping me create wealth and save while I'm working, and giving some actual direction to the dollars that I have and that I've been entrusted with. And then when I'm in retirement mode, it's giving me direction again, saying, okay, it's okay. There's freedom to spend. Exactly. There's freedom to say, you know what, I can go out and buy something that I have been trying to, so many times I do meet with people. I'm like, you can afford a new car this year. You
right.
can do it. And they're like, well, I don't know. Yeah. And the reality of it is, if you budget that in, this is where I'm going to spend my money. It's another great way to overcome the money disorder.
Yeah, the fear goes away. It gives you freedom. It gives you liberation. I've heard people on our team say, I allocated a large sum of money and told my client, you need to spend this money and go on a giant vacation. And unfortunately, more times than not, they struggle to do it, don't do it at all, or do it with just, again, they don't get the full impact out of it like they should. And that's kind of tragic.
Yeah, and some people are like, I just can't become a big spender. Then become a big giver.
Exactly.
There's a lot of things and when you say spending, it doesn't have to be, hey, I need a new car every year, or I need to buy things that I don't feel are a good use of money. Okay, you are a steward. So what we're saying is the money needs to come to you, and you are the best person. You've saved it. The best person to decide where it goes. So whether that be to charities that you love and support, to your children who you love and sometimes support, right? Or it needs to be spent by you on experiences, maybe not things. I mean, many times things we know let us down, and it's like, oh, I wanted it, and then I got it, and then it, again, wasn't what I thought it was. But experiences.
Yeah.
That is where I think the budget is a key component for retirees, because when that money comes out and they're able to plan that trip,
right.
It is so, and do it with their family maybe, it is so valuable to them. Memories, when you're in your last days, the thing that you will have, it will not be the stuff, because you won't care. It won't be anything but the relationships and the memories with those people.
Yep, absolutely. So the first thing you got to do is you got to make this mental shift from saving to spending. You got to have a budget. Ben, what's the last thing that every single income plan needs?
Well, income needs to be regular and consistent. Again, it needs a purpose. So what I think is important is that instead of you asking for permission to spend your money, is that whoever you're working with in your financial professional is sending you that money on a regular, consistent basis. This is not a show about investments, so I'm not going to get into the particulars for your situation. But there's many different ways to do that, to say, here is my steady, many times guaranteed, consistent income that just shows up like your paycheck used to.
And again, not to get into the nuts and bolts of how we do strategy, but I would have to assume when we work with people, you are specifically setting up the cadence and the rhythm and the frequency that retirees receive that income probably is going to look a lot like the way it was structured while they were working. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you've been conditioned to get a certain income your whole entire life, so you should continue that. Even sometimes it can be twice a month. I mean, you get your paychecks twice a month. Why not?
Right.
Many retirees say once a month's fine, but I could tell you, Jared, the easiest thing for people to spend in retirement is Social Security.
Right.
It shows up every month, and it doesn't feel
like their money.
They're taking. It's not their money. It is, but believe me, the government might not make you feel that way, but it is your money that's set aside for you. And when you get that, it spends so easy, and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at it as like I'm dipping into this account out here so that I can use it, and I'm pulling it out. It should just come to you, whether that be whatever strategy you're using. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be regular. I gave advice a few weeks ago to a client who was making a pension decision, and instead of taking a lump sum, I had them do the monthly paycheck. And here's the funny thing, Jared. It was a super small pension, and they almost joked about it. It was like, I think it was like $120 a month. I'm not kidding you. It was from some small teacher's work that she did back in the day. And I said, you know what, Mrs. Client, this money is money that's going to come every single month at the exact same time, and it's $119. What could you do with it? They're like, well, it's such a little bit. I said, here's what I would do. Is every single month, on the day it comes, you schedule a date with Mr. Client, and you guys go out and you just kind of smile. You think, hey, we have to spend all $120 on this dinner date to get together and just do it, okay? Or you give it away. every month you go out around that same time, you say, okay, there's a person we can give a $100 bill to. Let's do it. And every month it becomes part of this. People are very wealthy. They're not needing $120 a month. But instead of taking this several $1,000 payment all at once, which looked like wealth, we turned it into income. I think that's important.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this episode of Retire Repurposed. We'll continue this conversation next week. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.